Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the books that I have read this week. I'm currently dog sitting again. This is a sort of repeated thing, you'll notice. I'll be darting around. I think I won't be sort of properly home for recording for a while actually. But here I am. There will be a dog, there is a dog in the background, not this background, but sort of behind the camera that way, who will occasionally be snoring because he's a very sleepy boy. But anyway, enough about that. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the books I've read this week. So let's get started. First, before I begin properly, there are a couple of books that I'm kind of halfway through, well, a bit into at the moment. And I'll talk about those more in an upcoming one, but kind of wanted to mention just because they're sort of around and I'm thinking about them a lot, which is firstly Richard Millward's Man-Eating Typewriter, a book that I'm a little bit into, about 100 or so pages. And it is wild. It's a book all about a sort of a found manuscript, but the manuscript is in Polari, the sort of an old kind of queer-coded language used to sort of avoid detection, which is really quite fun and wild and rambunctious, and I'm really loving this. So this has been a fun addition to sort of some of the booker reading to kind of offset it, as has been In Her Jaws by Rosamund Taylor, which is a collection of poetry that deals a lot with sort of I don't know, so far from what I've seen, just a lot with sort of sensuality and this sort of and real beauty and the kind of queer love kind of way. So these are sort of two books that have been really kind of, that I've been sort of starting to read a bit at the moment and plan on reading a lot more. So those all come up, but I just sort of, they've been very much on my mind, so kind of wanted to mention. Next up, I read All the Little Bird Hearts by Viktoria Lloyd-Barlow, longlisted for the Booker, and I really enjoyed it, a lot more than I thought I would actually. I've got a solo, like a separate review coming up that's just about this book, but long story short, essentially this is a book written by an autistic woman about an autistic woman, and it's actually really quite refreshing to see what that means in terms of what the book looks like, because I think traditionally there has been a lot of neurodiverse people being written about, and not necessarily that coming from them themselves, and that has led to sort of sometimes this way of writing that's been quite othering. So actually I found it really quite refreshing the way that this book has approached it, and actually it has sort of meant that essentially the first 100 pages or so I really struggled to get into this book, because the rhythm is so not what I'm expecting. You know, having a book sort of told through the eyes of a neurodiverse character is actually quite interesting in terms of how it challenges what you might typically expect from a narrative, and how you expect characters to react or whatever. But the story largely is around Sunday, Sunday Forrester. She is an autistic woman with her daughter Dolly, and essentially, without going into spoilers, it's quite difficult to really talk a lot about this book, but essentially a lot of this book is about the relationship between her and her daughter, but particularly how the mother sort of tries to reconcile what their relationship looks like when she can't sort of quote unquote provide normal things for her daughter. So as far as Sunday herself is concerned, she's done everything right, and I think we do get the perspective, the sense in the book that she's been an incredibly loving and caring mother. But the outside world often doesn't see it that way in the book, and so we often get these other characters coming in and sort of chiming in ways that sort of suggests that what she's doing is not normal, and as a result, that, you know, she's being a bad parent. And so it's really fascinating to see how these dynamics play off against each other, particularly through the eyes of a character who doesn't understand why people think she's doing a bad job. And so I just think it's a really beautifully told book. And if you are struggling with the book itself in terms of the kind of the way it builds up, I'd really recommend just sort of getting to sort of 100, 150 pages. And I know that seems like a lot of book to get to before it kind of gets good or whatever, but I think you need that rhythm and the setup of it for the later part of this book to really have its sort of effect. And I don't think that's a bad thing about the book at all. I think it's just that it's a different rhythm to what we're expecting books normally to be, I think. And so once you kind of tune into that rhythm a little bit more, I think this book really sings and is really powerful in so many ways. Next up, a book with a very similar cover, and that is Birdgirl by Mya-Rose Craig. And this is a non-fiction book. This is a sort of memoir / call to action but it is by this young woman, Mya-Rose Craig, and she is a birder. She goes and I was about to say hunts, definitely not hunts, definitely is on the hunt for birds in terms of seeing them, observing them in the wild. And so she talks, particularly the first part of this book is really her going into a lot of detail around her and her parents and how they, going birding is this really big part of who they are as a family, how it really brings them together, how it's really important, and just her absolute joy in seeing a new species of bird that she's not seen before. The book then kind of goes into a little bit more detail about this family dynamic, and so we soon learn that her mother, for example, struggles with bipolar disorder, and what that then means is that her mother's sort of swings in mood can often have quite a big impact on the family. Her father does a lot of caring to look after her mother. There are lots of other things that sort of happen, and she sort of feels already a bit of an outcast, within school because she spends all this time birding and her friends don't sort of seem to get it because of the family dynamic and because of various sort of other things. She also talks really quite poignantly, I think, about feeling othered in terms of being a young woman of colour and what that looks like in school and all those other things. So sort of facing sort of racism and Islamophobia and various other things in school and kind of what she does about it. Then the book sort of takes this other turn where we sort of start learning a little bit more about how she comes to be who she is now, and she sets up this blog. She becomes a really sort of passionate advocate for the conservation of nature. She really argues for the protection of various species of bird and various other things in so many ways, and it's really interesting and really profound. And then we also get this part towards the end where we start seeing how all of those things come together. Her activism, her family life, birding, all these other things, and the sort of life she builds for herself through that as well. And I found it really quite beautiful in many ways, particularly with the audiobook, just hearing her talk about it, just to sort of get a sense of, just this sort of the various ways that being out in nature really mean a lot to her. But also the ways that humans respond so well to nature and how important it is that we look after that. Next up, in a similar-ish theme, I read Late Light, Finding Home in the West Country by Michael Malay. And this book I thought was just really beautiful in so many ways. It's a book about this man, Michael Malay. It's a non-fiction book, with him talking about his sort of native nature that he kind of grew up around in Indonesia. He moves around various places, but is sort of settling in the UK for most of this book. And he talks a lot about how his move to the UK comes with not only the sort of the typical things that we might expect, so not necessarily language barriers, but learning local dialects or learning local customs, local cultural things, the political situation, but also how that affects nature. He's used to seeing specific types of nature in the world around him and needs to be connected to that. And he often feels kind of not at home for various other parts of this book, in talking about how the UK can be quite difficult. But I think what really elevates this book to being something even more interesting is the way that he connects the dots between that story and also the political situation in the UK at various points for when he's here. So he talks, for example, about this is a genuine quote, the hostile environment policy of the government, of the sort of government a few years back. Under Theresa May, when Theresa May was Home Secretary. And this feels like a very sort of specific political pinch point, but I'll kind of go into it. Essentially, a large part of that was around the way that the UK treated and saw people from abroad. Michael Malay obviously then fits into this category as somebody moving to the UK. And he talks a lot about how this hostility really created this very odd environment and this very odd atmosphere. Tied to that is also the fact that not only is he from somewhere else and is here, but also nature is a thing that's borderless, right? You've got birds that migrate vast distances and go to different places. And what's to really discern a bird? You can't really place a bird in the same way and be like, oh yes, this is definitely a Moroccan bird. Because although yes, it may spend a lot of time there, it may also be one that migrates and moves around regularly. And at what point, it doesn't have a nationality, it doesn't have a statehood in that sense. And so he talks about how nature has quite a lot to teach us about this. But I think it's just a really interesting book of these sort of personal observations, but also the sort of political astuteness going on, and also just these other various factors. I just found it really compelling as a book, and just really greatly enjoyed it overall. And so those are the books that I have read this week. I hope you are having a good week. I hope you're having a great time. I'm still sort of very much on the Booker train, but I think I feel a lot calmer about it this year, in the sense that I think in previous years, all of my reading just initially switched to Booker. And I think I maybe burnt out a little bit on it. Whereas I think this year, maybe also because I'd already read 6 when the long list was announced, and the ones I've got left mostly aren't long, I'm going to try and really space this one out, I think. So maybe a Booker book or 2 a week, maybe max. And really, fast forward to 2 weeks' time where I read all of them in 1 week. But I think as a result, I'm going to sort of slowly pepper them into this as we go, but I'm also trying to maintain my sanity and also enjoy them. So I'll be sort of peppering them in, but there will be solo reviews for all the Booker books as well. I need to kind of go and record ones from books I read a while ago. I need to try and remember the stories of, so there we go. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker. I hope you're having a fantastic week. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.